Before I go into my next review, I have something I want to get off my chest, and I'm actually going to defend something from the prequels, given a recent experience from my life. There is one part of the prequels that I've heard some people criticize and say doesn't make sense, namely Red Letter Media's Mr. Plinkett reviews of The Phantom Menace, which, I mean, their reviews of the prequels are probably my favorite online reviews in all of the internet. They're really great and really funny. If you haven't seen them, check it out. But at one point, Mr. Plinkett makes fun of Yoda's line of thinking of the path to the dark side. We've all heard the line. It was in the original trailer. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hatred leads to suffering. I'm going to say now, after what I've been through the last couple of days, that Yoda's line of thinking makes a ton of sense. And I'm going to admit something about myself that is a little embarrassing, but it makes the story work, so fuck it, I'm just going to go for it. I have a crippling phobia, a fear of mice and rats. I do not like the vermin. I fucking hate them. They creep me the fuck out. Every time I see one, it just, I just lose it. And it triggers me, shall we say. Not a fan of them. Come home to work on Thursday night. I was actually going to film this review that night. I had actually set up my camera and my microphone and everything, and I was all ready to go. Go into the kitchen for a quick snack. I see a little mouse scurrying across my kitchen counter, and grab my keys, grab my wallet, grab my my cell phone, and I just got the hell out of there, and I was like, nope. Not going to be in here. I'm not going in here until I can get some way of getting that thing out of there. This led to a couple of phone calls, me having to stay the night at a friend's place because I just refused to share my apartment with a mouse. Set up an appointment with Orkin the next day. Had to take off work, unfortunately. Well, not take off. I got to telework, but still. I didn't have to use vacation time, but it's still like I hate not going into the office because I feel like it's like throwing my entire schedule off. But anyway, made up an appointment with Orkin. We set traps all over the place. Didn't catch the fucker that I saw on Thursday, but we did find likely entry points and block those up and set traps everywhere. So if you come back, you're a dead fucker. That's all I got to say there. So Yoda's line of thinking totally works. I'm afraid of the mice. They cause great fear in me. That fear leads to anger because I hate being uncomfortable and fearful in my own home. That is infuriating to me, and it really irritates me. That anger leads to hatred of the source of my fear and my anger, which would be the goddamn mouse, the interloper, the instrument of my pain. I want him to suffer. So, if you come back, you're fucking dead. And when it comes to mice and rats and any other interloping animals that feel the need to invade on my personal space, might as well call me Darth Mouse Killer. Because, goddamn. I mean, it's like whenever I see a mouse or a rat, like Bill Murray's whole thing in Caddyshack of using plastic explosives to take down a gopher, doesn't seem too unreasonable to me. That's how much I hate the little fuckers. But that crisis has been averted. I just thought I would share that because I just thought it was really funny. That it's like, take my pain and use it to tell an amusing story or to like tie it into Star Wars in some way, shape, or form because sure, why not? But moving on from there, let's get to the review that I planned for this month. I've already done the Thrawn trilogy, which is like I said, it was one of the big elements of the expanded universe that really kicked off the expanded universe and made it what it became. Without new movies coming out, I mean, that was the best material we had for Star Wars were the books. In the world of comics, it got a very different start in terms of the story that began it all. And granted, what I'm about to review was not the first Star Wars comic, but it was the most influential. It was the most... it was the one that made Star Wars a viable comic book franchise. Or comic book property. I mean, and Marvel's continued to today with all their different, offshoot series and everything. standalone stories, and every character seems to be getting its own comic book series these days. But while it wasn't the first comic, I think the Dark Empire trilogy is the most important element of establishing Star Wars as a viable property in the world of comic books. It was the first one that a lot of people read, I think. It was the first one published by Dark Horse Comics, who took the Star Wars license and just ran with it, and they were the ones that were responsible for the Star Wars comics for the most part during that time period. And it was very important, and a lot of people remember it fondly. And it's kind of like how I am and a lot of other people are for this, the Thrawn trilogy. The Dark Empire trilogy is kind of that in the world of the visual printed medium of comic books and graphic novels and whatever. My history with it is very different from the Thrawn trilogy. The Thrawn trilogy, I grew up with it. I loved it. I've reread it 3 or 4 times. It's honestly, I mean, truthfully speaking, it's one of my favorite books of all time. If you're asking me to do a top 10, I would have, no joke, I would have The Disaster Artist up there is one of my favorite books. I would have, Lord of the Rings up there. I would have, maybe, the Odyssey and the Iliad up there at some point. A little bit of Shakespeare up there. But right up there with them is the Thrawn trilogy. I just love it so much, and I grew up with it, and it's just something that I really hold in very high esteem. I don't have that same experience with the Dark Empire trilogy because I never read it. Not in my youth, anyway. It was just something... I wasn't the most avid comic book reader. I was more of a casual comic book reader. Every time I would... If I ever went into a comic book store, I would just pick up something that tickled my fancy, or say, oh, that looks interesting, I'll read that. And I wasn't an avid, I need to go to the comic book store every week and just pick up every title. I just kind of read whenever I felt like it. So I never read the Dark Empire trilogy. However, it gets referenced a lot in the novels, and I bring that up because every time I read a Star Wars book that did reference the events of the Dark Empire trilogy, I would just throw my hands up and go, what the fuck happened? Because the event that they would always reference in the books, and we're heading into spoiler territory here, so if you don't want this spoiled for you, turn the video off now. But I guarantee you it's probably been spoiled for you, because even if you haven't read the Dark Empire trilogy, I assure you've probably heard of this happening, because it gets referenced in so many of the books. And it's always a throwaway line, hey, remember that time that yada 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 happened? But it's such a big thing that I'm like, how do you just throw that out there and not elaborate on that? So, Luke Skywalker fell to the dark side and was the apprentice of the Emperor for a short period of time. The Emperor that he was an apprentice to was the spirit of Emperor Palpatine inhabiting a clone body that the Emperor had created for himself to achieve immortality. And he had this supply of clone bodies that he would transfer his soul into every time he died, or whenever the body would break down, which begs the question, how far was he willing to let those bodies go? Because he looks pretty rough in Jedi. But, yeah, it's one of those things where it's that's a pretty big thing. When the hell did that happen? I don't remember reading about that, but it happened in a comic book series that I never read, but a lot of other people read it, clearly. I was the one that was on the outliers there. But to show that it was referenced, I was exposed to it so many times before actually reading the comics. This was something that I got for Christmas when I was a kid, and I cannot believe they're in as good condition as they are. This is a series of art cards that I'd gotten as a stocking stuffer when they're basic collectibles. It's mostly covers of other comics, illustrations. I think there's some Drew Struzan work in there. Oh, there's Mara Jade. She shows up in one. And one that popped up in this set was cover art for one of the Dark Empire. I believe this is for issue number 2. And it shows Luke, a very evil-looking Luke, standing in front of what looks like an Empire war machine. Turns out it's one of the World Devastators that's portrayed in the story, which I also had an experience with the World Devastators playing the Rogue Squadron game on N64. Probably... I mean, that might be my favorite Star Wars game, is Rogue Squadron. it basically took the best level of Shadows of the Empire and just made the whole fucking game that, and it was great, and loved it. And there were a couple other games like it, but none of them quite measured up to the original Rogue Squadron, in my opinion. Maybe that's just me, but yeah. So like the Dark Empire trilogy, even though I didn't read it in my youth, it was something that was pretty much all over Star Wars expanded universe material, and like I said, it was in like art card collectibles. It was referenced in a lot of books. I had some trading cards that are long since gone, like depicting certain events from the Dark Empire trilogy. I remember having, it was either a trading card or like another like collectible art card like that collection over there, which by the way, I should probably get plastic coverings for those, because those are in there. I'm shocked that they're as in good condition as they are, but it's like, man, I should probably protect those a little bit better. But anyway, I distinctly remember having like a picture of Luke kneeling to the Emperor and depicting that moment. So when I found out eventually that this was all something that happened in the comics, it was something I wanted to read because it sounded so like universe altering. It's like, oh my god, Luke worked for the Emperor? What the fuck? And I never read it. I never was able to get a copy of it. I never, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I didn't track it down that hard. I had other concerns like graduating from high school and graduating from college and all that other fun stuff. But in the new digital age that we are in, I was able to obtain a digital copy on my Kindle. That's the cover right there. And yeah, so I was finally able to read the Dark Empire trilogy, which consists of the original 6-issue miniseries of Dark Empire, the 6-issue miniseries Dark Empire 2, and then the 2-issue series Empire's End, not to be confused with the recent Aftermath Empire's End, which concluded that trilogy. Where am I? Anyway, I finally got to read it, start to finish, and it's fine. It's fine. It's one of those things. I don't know. I have heard people criticize the Thrawn trilogy and say it's not really as good as Star Wars fans says it is. They just really like it because it was the first major Star Wars thing that they were exposed to after the movies during a period when there was no Star Wars material coming out. And I'm like, okay, there might be something to that, except I've reread the Thrawn trilogy like 3 or 4 times, and it holds up every single time I read it. So I don't feel like it's just a nostalgia thing. I feel like it's legitimately good and legitimately worthy of the praise that it gets. I do feel like, having read Dark Empire, that there's a lot of it there that I feel like... I think its fame comes from the fact that it was the first major like Star Wars comic book series that a lot of people read. And like I said, not the first comic, but it was the first... I think it was the first major one that a lot of people got sucked into, and they just kind of look at it through rose-colored glasses, which, again, I fully understand that. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug. When I was a kid, I thought He-Man and She-Ra Secret of the Sword was the best movie ever made. Try watching it now. Does not hold up. But anyway, I think Dark Empire is fine as a comic book series, if you want to call a 2-issue series a comic book series, but I think all 3 of them are fine for what they are. I don't think they're entirely epic, and to be perfectly honest, in the first 2 entries, in Dark Empires 1 and 2, the artwork in it, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the artist off the top of my head, I'm not a fan of the way it looks, and instead of editing in a screenshot, because, like I said, with reviewing comics, I'm no Linkara, so I'm not going to be as proficient as he is, but this is just an example that I wanted to pull up. You'll notice that the colors are very monochromatic. It's very like a bunch of heavy greens and heavy yellows, and there are these kind of dull, muted, like pukey looking colors. Let me see if I can find another example. Like right here, this is Luke kneeling to the Emperor in that scene. I don't know if you can really tell, but it's like, it's very monochromatic, very, like I said, muted, kind of crappy looking colors, and it just was very distracting to me reading it, and I just couldn't help but feel like, what probably would have worked better is if the whole thing was in black and white. Or just make it look like classic Star Wars, where, I mean, Star Wars, even when it's, like, blacks and whites and very standard colors, it does have a very unique style to it, where the colors, no matter what it is, whether it's white, black, gold, or blue, or whatever, there's a pop to it, and helps the character stand out more, helps, the world stand out more. And this just looks like, I don't know, it just doesn't work for me, and it just never looked good to me. And doesn't look nearly as good as the covers. Like that Luke picture I just showed, that looks awesome. And this just kind of looks like, I hate to say crappy, but it's not my cup of tea. And that's basically what I'm going to say. Not something that I enjoy looking at, and it doesn't look like Star Wars, which is another problem with it. Some of the character designs look fine. I think the Emperor looks appropriately hideous, especially when his clone body is decaying. There's a character, Vita, God, what's her name? I've already forgotten. Vina Boda, who's like this ancient Jedi that's been in hiding from the Emperor since the Jedi Purge, and she's a good guy, but she looks hideous. It is this very ugly design. She's like this broken down old woman, and it's like, yeah, that kind of fits. I kind of dig that design, but it's just the coloring that really kind of was off-putting to me. And then you get to Empire's End, and both of those issues, it's this weird mix between the way Empire Ends looks, or I'm sorry, the way Dark Empires 1 and 2 look, and how like classic Star Wars would look. So it's this weird amalgamation that just doesn't look right. So I know they got a different artist for Empire's End, but it's that's just how it is. But how's the story go? Like I said, it's fine. It's fine. And I think one of the reasons I wasn't as on board with it, and it's one of those things, I knew it was going to happen because I'd had it spoiled for me for years, but I think finally reading the story, I kind of look at it and go, even though Luke was really kind of getting on the Emperor's side to like be a mole and to tear him down, which begs the question, why would the Emperor be that stupid to fall for that? Because Luke is ultimately the one that helps like destroy a lot of the Emperor's clone bodies. He deals some heavy damage to the Emperor towards the end of it. Leia's able to like save Luke at the end and all that other stuff, but I don't like the idea of Luke becoming the Emperor's apprentice, because to me it kind of undermines Return of the Jedi. It kind of undermines Vader's redemption. It kind of undermines like that whole story. To me, like, Luke already overcame that hurdle. He got tempted by the dark side. He didn't succumb. And to me, it's like, all right, we're done. Now, that's over. Let's move on to the next stage in the evolution, which should be rebuilding the Jedi Order, which is covered in Dark Empire 2, which I'll get to that in a minute. But I just wasn't a fan of them basically, I don't know, retconning the end of Return of the Jedi. It's like, oh, Luke fell to the dark side, bye. And I don't know, I just wasn't a fan of it. And some people have complained about the ending to Return of the Jedi, and I know Larry Kasdan has said that there were very different plans for the ending of Return of the Jedi, but the ending is the ending we got, and I would like to see you move past that. Instead, this feels like a step backwards and just kind of somebody reshaping it into what he wanted it to be. Sorry, did I just hear a mousetrap snap? The fuck, dead? I hope so. I'll check it later. I don't care. I'm not editing this out either. But anyway, Dark Empire 1 is largely about Luke's fall to the dark side and ultimately working with the Emperor, but also kind of being a mole to him and various things like that. So that's something that didn't really appeal to me all that much. And I was kind of like, like I said, it feels like you're retconning Jedi. Now, other stuff that's going on is really cool. And this is probably, if I have to credit Dark Empire with one thing, this might be the thing that really put Boba Fett on the map, because he makes his return in this series and basically spends all of Dark Empire 1 and Dark Empire 2 basically hunting Han Solo. So it makes me wonder if like the whole idea of Boba Fett's feud with Han Solo and that really got expanded on the expanded universe, it really kind of started here, I feel like. I guess you could say it started in Empire Strikes Back, but the idea of Fett being like this relentless hunter that just is desperately trying to get Solo, I mean, I guess you could say it started with the Christmas special, which never happened. I don't know what you all are talking about, but anyway. I feel again, reading Dark Empire for the first time, I feel like this probably helped to establish Boba Fett as the fan favorite that he ultimately became. And he's fucking cool. I mean, that's just how it is. I mean, Boba Fett, he's got so much mystery surrounding him that, and he is so believably badass without doing anything that when you get material where he does do something, it's just awesome. And him just hunting down, even though he fails at capturing Solo, like, all of that is just really great to read and to see. If there was anything I liked about Dark Empire 1, it was the inclusion of Boba Fett. And the characterization of Leia as well. I thought she was handled very well. I also liked the World Devastators as, like, a plot device. I've made it known before that the whole, like, planet-destroying weapons really annoy me because it just feels like a retread of the Death Star. But the World Devastators kind of get a pass because their whole function is to cycle, or to collect, like, resources from the planets that they attack and basically render that world like a dead husk, while also taking all of those resources and materials to use in factories to produce weapons for the Empire. So there's actually, like, a practical use to it. It isn't just press button and blow up. It's like, no, we're stealing resources, fuck you, bye. So it's a little bit more creative than the typical, like, you know, like Starkiller Base or the Sun Crusher or, like, the myriad of other planet-destroying weapons. The Darksaber's another one. So the World Devastators I'm fine with. The one I'm not fine with is the one introduced in Dark Empire 2, the Galaxy Gun, which is basically just, as it sounds, a big gun that blows up planets. So it's just the Death Star again, and that's a retread that's annoying. But Dark Empire 2 is largely about Luke's early attempts at trying to reform the Jedi Order. Now that he's had his brush with the dark side, he's back in the good guys' graces now, and all is apparently understood and forgiven, and he starts trying to rebuild the Jedi Order and find some recruits, falls in love with one of them, because the early days of the EU were obsessed with trying to get Luke a love interest. And, like, look, the reason Mara Jade worked ultimately as Luke Skywalker's wife is because she was established as a character first. And the goal of her was not to be Luke's love interest. That was just something that happened years after the fact. We got to spend time with Mara Jade as a character, and she works as a character on her own without Luke. And that's why she worked. Callista was really annoying. And Jem, who's the love interest in this one, while nowhere near as annoying as Callista, just feels like a tacked on, oh, Luke gets a girlfriend now, hooray! I don't care. Like, I just don't care. It's just a waste of time. Why is she even here? There's some interesting things that happen in the establishing a Jedi Order and Jedi training subplot, where there's an ancient Jedi that's a tree that helps stop some dark side agents of the Emperor, who's still alive and still cloning himself at this point in the story. And he ultimately gives Luke's first round of students their own lightsabers. They were like ancient lightsabers that were lost during the Jedi Purge or something like that. But yeah, so Dark Empire 2, like I said, not a fan of the Galaxy Gun, and doesn't feel like it has the same stakes as Dark Empire 1, because Dark Empire 1, while I'm not a fan of Luke going to the dark side and all of that, at least it does, and even using the Emperor as the villain again is kind of like, really? We're doing that? Okay. At least it feels like a shocking moment when it happens. Dark Empire 2 is more ordinary, and just kind of like, oh, okay, that's fine. And Luke forming the Jedi Order gets expanded on a lot more in the books. I mean, I've already reviewed the Jedi Academy trilogy, which I wasn't the biggest fan of, but, we get more of an explanation, more time with the Jedi Order moving forward in the books, and not so much here in these stories. And then that brings us to the concluding Empire's End. The final 2 issues came out in 95, I believe, just to kind of wrap up the story. Anakin Solo, the third child of Han and Leia, was born at the very end of Dark Empire 2. And Empire's End is largely about the Emperor on his last clone body, with no other way to make another clone body, needing a new host to transfer his soul into, using Sith magic and alchemy and whatever. And he has selected Anakin Solo as his host body, which is a completely stupid move because Han and Leia are not going to raise a child that is possessed by the Emperor. They will find some way, shape, or form to purge the Emperor's soul from their baby. And if they can't, somebody's going to kill that baby because it's like, oh my god, it's possessed by the Emperor. Not the best plan of Palpatine's, but, you know, it's... And apparently Anakin Solo's body is the only one that will work, which is another kind of weird, stupid thing. But, yeah, Empire's End basically wraps it up in a rather ludicrous way. We do get that moment where Han Solo gets to basically kill the Emperor, which is kind of cool, saving his son. But overall, it feels like kind of a tack on to the other two Dark Empire. Like I said, it's just 2 issues, so it doesn't have the same time and energy put into it that the first 2 Dark Empire miniseries were. There are a couple of cool things, though, spread out through all 3 different story arcs, which ultimately, 14 issues? So overall, 14 issues, there's a bunch of cool things that you see, like Sith magic infused, like, rankers are used in a battle against the rebellion used by the Empire, created by the Emperor. The Emperor is also able to create force storms. Okay? There's a bunch of weird shit going on with the Emperor. They really amped up, like, what the Emperor could do in this one, which, to be fair, I mean, some of it does sound ridiculous, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, you know, we didn't really get to see all of what he was capable of in Return of the Jedi. We just saw the Force lightning, and for all we know, that could have just been the tip of the iceberg of what the Emperor was capable of. So there's a lot of room to really expand on it. They just expanded on it in really weird ways. But, yeah, so I mean, that's basically all my thoughts on Dark Empire. I'm trying to think of some other things that they did. Oh, they introduced another piece of credit that I'll give it. As far as I know, the Dark Empire, or Dark Empire 1, is the first instance of using holocrons in a Star Wars story. The Jedi holocrons would become a big part of, like, kind of the mythology of Star Wars, and still exist today, even with the new Disney canon, because they ultimately got used in the Clone Wars TV show. I remember they did that arc with Cad Bane stealing one, and trying to find a way to open it and gather information from it for his client, who was Darth Sidious. And yeah, so the Jedi holocron is like a big part of the canon, even to this day. And Rebels is even introduced. I don't know if Rebels introduced this. Star Wars Rebels, the cartoon show. I don't know if they introduced this or if it was introduced in another story. But we also have Sith holocrons, which is very interesting as well. So, like I said, Dark Empire did contribute a lot. It did create some things, like it established Boba Fett. It gave us holocrons. Gave us some interesting ideas, even if I wasn't always a fan of them. It's overall a fun series. I don't regret reading it. I recommend reading it just because of its historical significance and what it meant to so many people at the time. It's just not... Personally, it's not one of my favorites, though. Like, if I was going to reread anything for Star Wars, I would go for the Thrawn trilogy. I would go for... I would read Annihilation again. I really like that one. Shadows of the Empire is one I would go for. The X-Wing series I would go for. This one, it's just fine. It's fine. I don't hate it, but not the biggest fan, which apparently is a controversial opinion because it's one of those things that you're supposed to love. But, I'm different. I'm weird. I'm an asshole. What can I say? So that concludes my latest Star Wars review. Stay tuned. The end of September, I should have another one for you guys. But until then, see you later. And, also, fuck mice and fuck rats. Out.